let's wrap up our quick talk about primary sources with some review and some extension. So to review a primary source, it is the first evidence of something that happened, and it's created by someone who was there, whether they are creating it at the time of the event, for instance, someone taking a photograph of a presidential inauguration, that would be a primary source of that inauguration, or they are writing about it afterwards, but they were there. Keep that in mind. Okay. It's original documents and objects. You have the mistakes that the people make as they're writing at the time, and you will see that a lot of times if you go back and look at the grammar of some of the people who wrote, but it is their firsthand account. A secondary source is created after the event and not necessarily by someone who was there, but they can base it on primary sources. For example, textbooks and works of nonfiction about a place or an event like a war or a baseball game or a Super Bowl or something like that. If you write about it afterwards and you weren't there and you take your information from people who were there, it is still a secondary source. It can be really confusing, and it can be hard even for adults that are skilled in research to determine the difference. So don't get too upset with yourself if you're still not sure when you're looking at a source, whether it's a primary source or a secondary source. And as we touched on in one of the previous videos, another big controversy nowadays is we have so much online. If I'm using this computer and I'm looking up information, I am not looking at the actual document or the actual photograph. If I went to the Library of Congress and obtained a day pass and was able to actually see the actual document, then that would be different. If I went to a museum and was actually able to see a document or a creation of a model of something, or let's just say the Air and Space Museum, where you can see the Apollo spacecraft and things like that are the actual objects, then I'm looking at the primary source. If I'm looking at it online, am I really looking at a primary source? Big controversy. Might want to read some articles for yourself on that and draw your own conclusions. Now, what difference does it make? Well, if you're writing about history, you want to be accurate. And if you're doing research on a upper level high school, like the diploma program at York Academy, or on a college level, you absolutely have to be accurate, and you need to cite your sources and so on. But you can really make a lot of mistakes if you're not getting your sources correct and if you're not getting your facts correct. So not only are you fact checking, which is another whole part of research, but you are making sure that if you think you're looking at a primary source, that you're checking all the information given about that source to be sure it is a primary source. Remember, we used the Library of Congress example about the daguerreotype of John Hanson. It was a different John Hanson from a different country, published at a different time period. But on first look, you might have thought it was a primary source for the president of the Congress under the Articles of Confederation after they were ratified. So, give yourself some leeway, but don't ever forget to ask yourself a bunch of questions. Who created the source? Who published the source? What is it exactly? What am I looking at? When was this created? Which comes back to, was it someone who was there at the event, at the time period in which it took place, or was it afterwards? Where did it take place? And what's the purpose of the person who created this? The author's purpose for writing an article, the photographer's purpose for taking the picture, and so on. If you can answer a lot of those questions from doing research about the source you're using, you can often figure out on your own whether it's a primary source or secondary source, and not just rely on the website you're using or the museum you're in or whatever. So make sure that you verify your research.